As the CEO of the company, it's my job to make sure that we all rise to the occasion, and that's what we're going to do. It's going to take a little bit of time to straighten this out, but ultimately, I think it's going to be our finest hour, and we're going to get the result that we're looking for.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for another Virtual Investor What This Means segment. Today, we are featuring enVVeno Medical. My name is Janine Thomas. I am CEO of JTCIR, and I am very pleased to be joined by Rob Berman. He is CEO of enVVeno Medical. Welcome back, Rob.
Hey, Janine, thanks for having me.
Always happy to have you, Rob. Before we get started, I want to remind our audience that enVVeno is publicly listed on NASDAQ and trades under the ticker enVVeno. And during today's discussion, the company will be making forward-looking statements, and I encourage everyone to view the company's latest SEC filings on their website at enVVeno.com for the latest information. All right, Rob, we are going to dive right in. Today's topic is you recently announced that the company will file a request for a supervisory appeal of the not-approvable letter from the CDRH of the FDA that you previously received on August 19th this year in response to your premarket approval or PMA application for the VenoValve. So our questions today are going to really be tied to this appeal process. So first and foremost, Rob, were you surprised to get the non-approvable letter?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it wasn't the result that we were expecting based upon our prior interactions with the agency. We thought we were heading towards an approval. When you file a PMA application, the FDA comes back to you with feedback on what's commonly called a 90-day deficiency letter. And so, based on the deficiencies that the agency pointed out in that letter and our response to those deficiencies, we definitely thought that we were heading on track towards an approval.
Rob, can you share your thoughts after reading the letter?
Yeah, initially I was devastated. I mean, there's so many people that are relying on the VenoValve. There's, the millions of patients with severe CVI that have no effective treatment options. We have our shareholders, many of which have been with us for years, and my team. Um, and who's invested 6 years of hard work and dedication towards bringing the VenoValve to this point. So my initial reaction was feeling devastated, and I allowed myself to feel that way for about a day. Then it was time to get to work. When problems like this occur, you can either complain about it and go and hide and put your head in the sand, or you can rise to the occasion. And as the CEO of the company, it's my job to make sure that we all rise to the occasion. And that's what we're going to do.
I'm not surprised, Rob, that you made the decision to rise to the occasion. And I'm sure at this point it's all hands on deck. So, as you think about the appeal process, how did you select the firm that you were working with on the appeal?
Well, over the past several years, I've been working with a firm that specializes in FDA related issues called Deval and Associates. And I'm a firm believer that when possible, it's best to build those relationships in advance so that when something happens like this, you're ready to go and you're not building that relationship from scratch. So the first thing I was looking for was an assessment of whether we had the grounds to appeal, and if we did, which route we should take. You always have the right to appeal, but that doesn't mean it's always the right thing to do. And we weren't interested in chasing something that wasn't attainable. So the first thing I was really looking for was an assessment. Um, I also think that it was important to get a fresh set of eyes on our regulatory issues with the FDA. Not that there was anything wrong with the regulatory team we were working with in the past, but it always helps to get a fresh perspective. And so, I was looking for initially an assessment from the Duval firm and then a fresh perspective on the issues that were raised in the FDA letter.
So, Rob, you referenced that the firm had conducted an assessment. Can you talk to that assessment?
Yeah, so their conclusion was that we had multiple grounds to appeal and that the best avenue for us to follow was something called a supervisory appeal. I mentioned earlier that it's important to bring in a new perspective and a fresh set of eyes. And so we were also able to craft some new arguments for the FDA. So this appeal is not just a rehash of the same arguments we previously made, but we actually have new material that we're putting in front of the FDA in terms of arguments for this appeal.
Rob, in one of the press releases, you referenced FDA safety concerns. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. The FDA issues what are known as guidance documents. Guidance documents explain the FDA's thinking on a variety of regulatory topics. When it comes to safety, the guidance documents discuss putting the safety events in the proper context. So when we look at the SAVI study, yes, we had some safety events, most of which were related to either the surgical procedure as opposed to the device, or the fact that the patients were on aggressive anticoagulation to prevent blood clots. But when you look at the patients that had those events, 93% went on to have a clinical benefit. And not just a small benefit, but we're talking about a 9.5 point increase in their venous clinical severity score. And of those patients, 65% said they'd be open to having the procedure again. Those are examples of context that the FDA talks about in their guidance, and we're not sure that the agency appreciated that context. And that's one of the factors that we're going to be stressing in the appeal.
Really helpful background, Rob. In another press release, you mentioned the variety of data generated by the SAVI study. What makes you think that the data is sufficient to lead to a positive result?
Well, first of all, as I alluded to earlier, we're not just making the same arguments that we previously made to the FDA. We've actually come up with some different arguments to present to them this time. But in terms of the data, we worked collaboratively with the FDA over the past several years to make certain that we were collecting sufficient data that could lead to an approval. Another one of those guidance documents that the FDA has refers to data and them considering what's called the totality of the evidence. That's what the FDA told us that they were going to do for the SAVI study. That's what the guidance documents require them to do. And that's going to be one of the bases of our appeal, focusing and making sure that they've really reviewed the totality of the evidence.
There's so many people involved in the conduct of a clinical study. I'm interested to hear what's been the reaction from the savvy PIs and from industry.
Disappointment at first, but then the offers of support started pouring in. Several of our PIs have volunteered to come testify at our hearing with the FDA. Many of the commercial sites reached out to express their continuing interest. And then, of course, we've heard from patients that are waiting for the VenoValve. So there are a lot of people that are counting on the VenoValve and are looking forward to it coming to market. And so there were many, many offers of support, which was very nice to hear.
So, Rob, in line with those that are counting on the VenoValve and looking for it to come to market, as far as next steps, when can we expect to get an update on the appeal?
Well, as we said in the press release, we hope to hear something by the end of the year. Um, I'd also like to point out that the VenoValve, in addition to being a first-in-class product for us, it's also a first-in-class device for the FDA. And first-in-class devices, are not black and white because there's no set standards upon which to judge the product. We had a couple days off, and I was watching TV, and the movie Apollo 13 came on. And for me, that's one of those movies where, you're switching through the channels, and if you see a movie, there's, maybe a handful of movies where you just stop and watch it, no matter how many times you've watched it before. And I was watching the movie and relating to the fact that what went on with Apollo 13, if you remember, there were problems with the ship and they had to bring the astronauts home and they had to do a lot of things for the first time and they had to be very inventive. And I think there are a lot of similarities between that and when you have a first in class product through the FDA. You're doing things for the first time. You need to be inventive. And, there was one point at the end of the movie where um, I think Ed Harris plays the NASA administrator called Gene Kranz. And some people are talking about how this could be the worst disaster in NASA history. And Gene Kranz turns to the people who are talking about that and he says, Gentlemen, I beg to differ with you. I think it's going to be our finest hour. And that's what I think about the VenoValve. It's going to take a little bit of time to straighten this out, but ultimately, I think it's going to be our finest hour. and we're going to get the result that we're looking for.
Excellent, Rob. I always appreciate the candid discussion, and what a way to end it. So, thank you so much for your time explaining to our audience, explaining to your shareholders who are watching this segment. And this does conclude our What This Means segment featuring enVVeno Medical. Rob, thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to having you back for an update on the appeal. And to our audience, thank you for your time and attention. If you like what you saw today, I do encourage you to visit enVVeno.com for more information on the company and to sign up to follow the company to receive their alerts, as well as follow their social channels to stay current on the latest information. And as a reminder, enVVeno trades on NASDAQ under the ticker enVVeno. Rob, thanks again. Thanks to our audience, and I wish everyone a great rest of your day.